I want you to imagine, just for a second, a really highly specific scenario.
Okay.
You wake up on a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. You go to the kitchen, you pour your coffee, sit down, and open your phone to check the local news. And right there, you are hit with this massive, bold headline.
The kind that just ruins your morning.
Oh, completely ruins it. Because the headline says that a foreign military, a major superpower from the other side of the planet, is planning to build a high-tech, rapid deployment infectious disease facility right in your country's backyard.
Yeah, that would definitely grab your attention.
Right. And they aren't proposing this as some, sluggish 5-year infrastructure plan. They intend to break ground and have it fully operational within 7 days.
Which is just jarring. It's the kind of information that completely shatters your routine, and you immediately start, calculating the proximity of this proposed site to your own house.
Exactly. You put the coffee mug down, and your mind just starts racing through all the implications. I mean, maybe there is a fleeting moment where you think about the economic influx, right? State-of-the-art medical tech, millions of dollars in investment, local training.
Sure, the initial silver lining.
Yeah, but that is almost instantly eclipsed by this very primal panic. Because then you read the subheadline, and you realize exactly why they're building it. They are constructing a staging ground for one of the deadliest viruses on the human radar.
Yeah.
And they want to place the primary containment zone for their exposed personnel, essentially, in your neighborhood.
Which, it forces you to ask some incredibly difficult, nuanced questions. Questions about sovereignty, biological safety, and ultimately, who actually absorbs the risk when a global superpower decides that your backyard is the most strategically advantageous place to manage their most dangerous problems.
And that tension, that exact feeling, is what brings us to today's mission. Today, we are taking a deep dive into something officially known as the Kenya-U.S. Strategic Ebola Containment Proposal.
It's a heavy one today.
It really is. And to pull this apart, we are drawing from a pretty thick stack of detailed investigative reporting and policy analysis. We've got sources from Reuters, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, CBS News, and The Guardian.
A lot of heavy hitters.
Yeah. And we are going to examine this unprecedented proposal through the intersecting lenses of massive military logistics, shifting geopolitical alliances, and the very real visceral anxieties of local Kenyan citizens who are suddenly staring down the barrel of a world-class biological threat.
And we really need to establish right off the bat why this specific blueprint matters so deeply to you, the listener, regardless of whether you live in Nairobi or New York or London.
Right, because this isn't just local news.
Exactly. This is not just a regional news story about a medical tent going up in East Africa. What these combined reports reveal is a fundamental, I'd say, tectonic shift in how the world's most powerful nations view disease.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It really is. We are witnessing the final departure from treating a viral outbreak solely as a humanitarian crisis, where the primary response is just sending doctors, aid, and blankets.
Right.
We are now entering an era where biological pathogens are treated as hardline national security threats. They are managed, contained, and neutralized with the exact same strategic intensity and logistical muscle as a hostile military adversary.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first thing that jumps off the page of every single one of these source articles is a glaring question about geography.
The location.
Yeah, the location. The current rapidly expanding Ebola outbreak, specifically this rare and highly fatal variant called the Bundibugyo strain, which, by the way, the World Health Organization is treating as a major international emergency.
Right, it's very serious.
That outbreak is actively burning through regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, and neighboring Uganda. So, if the epicenter of the crisis is deep in the DRC and Uganda, why on earth is the proposed U.S. isolation facility being built in Laikipia, which is in central Kenya?
It presents an absolute geographic puzzle at first glance.
It seems entirely counterintuitive. If your house is on fire, you don't build a new fire station 2 towns over.
No, you definitely don't.
You send the trucks directly to the epicenter of the blaze. So proposing a facility in Laikipia, a site designed to hold 50 and potentially expandable up to 250 beds for American personnel exposed to the virus, it just seems entirely misplaced.
I get why it looks that way.
Why intentionally transport highly infectious individuals hundreds of miles away from the hot zone, overpopulated areas, to central Kenya?
Well, what's fascinating here is the strategic, almost cold calculus behind that exact decision. When you are dealing with a pathogen that has the fatality rate and transmission profile of the Bundibugyo strain of Ebola, that standard fire station analogy actually inverts.
Wait, really? How so?
You absolutely do not want your primary containment, your evacuation hub, and your command center to be physically engulfed in the flames.
Yeah.
You require a staging ground that provide absolute, unbreakable logistical reliability.
Okay, I see.
And that is exactly where Kenya enters the global equation.
Hmm.
Over the past several decades, Kenya has meticulously positioned itself as the premier regional medical, economic, and logistical hub of East Africa.
But, I mean, is a highly reliable air transport system really enough to justify flying a potentially contagious Ebola patient over populated areas?
It's a huge debate.
Because one turbulent flight, right? One mechanical failure on a transport plane, or one miscommunication with local air traffic control, and you have theoretically dropped a biological bomb on Nairobi. The risk of transit seems wildly disproportionate to the benefit of just having a nicer airstrip.
And that is the exact risk-benefit analysis military planners are agonizing over right now. But if we look at the specific environmental factors outlined in the reporting, the U.S. assessment is that Kenya offers a baseline of stability that the epicenter in eastern Congo simply cannot guarantee during an escalating crisis.
What kind of stability are we talking about practically?
First, Nairobi possesses advanced, internationally accredited hospitals and massive international aviation infrastructure. You're starting with a foundation of highly developed medical capability.
So the groundwork is already there.
Exactly. Second, you have a much greater degree of political and infrastructural stability. You have paved, reliable highway networks, robust telecommunications, and airspace that is tightly regulated and secure.
So it's about minimizing the chaotic variables that usually accompany a disaster zone.
Precisely. In an emergency evacuation scenario involving a highly infectious lethal pathogen, a washed-out dirt road, or a regional power grid failure, or even a delayed clearance for a medical flight that isn't just a logistical inconvenience.
It's a catastrophe.
Yeah, it is a critical, cascading security failure that puts the entire containment protocol at risk. The U.S. needs pristine, unbroken supply chains.
Makes sense.
And the third factor the reports highlight is what strategists call the geographic Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone. Like,
Yeah.
not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. Kenya sits in a perfect spatial relationship to the active outbreak. It is close enough to the borders of Uganda and the DRC that military aircraft can execute rapid, short-hop evacuation flights for exposed personnel in a matter of hours.
But not so close that it's in the thick of it.
Right. Crucially, Laikipia is geographically insulated enough from the active hot zone to minimize the immediate risk of organic cross-border transmission reaching the facility itself. They're isolating their most valuable asset, the evacuation hub, for the unpredictable chaos of the outbreak epicenter.
Okay, I see the logic of using a buffer state. But reading between the lines of the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post coverage, it becomes incredibly clear that the United States didn't just throw a dart at a map of stable African nations and hit Kenya.
No, definitely not random.
There are deep established institutional roots driving this specific choice.
That is arguably the most vital piece of the puzzle. The U.S. military and diplomatic corps already have a highly established, deeply entrenched footprint in Kenya.
So they aren't starting from scratch.
Not at all. We aren't talking about a sudden, desperate phone call between diplomats who have never met. We are talking about decades of embedded, day-to-day medical research ties.
Can you give me an example from the sources?
Yeah, to give you a concrete example, the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, often referred to in military and medical circles as RARE, has been operating shoulder to shoulder with the Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, in Nairobi for a very long time.
Okay, wait. I've heard of Walter Reed in the context of the hospital in Maryland, but how does an American Army Research Institute functionally operate inside a Kenyan medical facility? Are they just, like, sharing office space?
Oh, it is much deeper than sharing office space.
Yeah.
They run joint laboratories. You have American military epidemiologists and Kenyan infectious disease specialists working to the exact same benches, sequencing viral genomes side by side.
Oh, wow. So they are completely integrated.
Highly integrated. They have integrated disease surveillance partnerships, meaning they jointly monitor outbreaks of malaria, HIV, and emerging pathogens across the region. They share raw data, they co-author research, and they utilize the same diagnostic equipment. They speak the same technical language.
Well, that changes the dynamic completely. When the U.S. government decides they need to erect an emergency Ebola containment zone, they aren't cold calling a foreign health ministry and hoping for cooperation.
Right, they're activating an existing network.
Yeah, colleagues they've been collaborating with on health security for years.
And that pre-existing relationship extends far beyond just health security. The U.S. and Kenya share profound security, defense, and intelligence cooperation. They partner extensively on counterterrorism operations in the Horn of Africa, they actively share real-time intelligence, and they conduct joint military training exercises on Kenyan soil.
And why does that matter for an Ebola facility?
Because the bureaucratic and legal pathways required to authorize heavy military cargo flights, move sensitive biohazard equipment, and deploy armed personnel are already greased.
Ah, the red tape is already cut.
Exactly. If you attempted to drop a facility like this into a country where you didn't have those pre-existing military-to-military agreements, it would take months just to negotiate the legal frameworks and status of forces agreements. In Kenya, the institutional foundation is already poured and cured.
Which provides the perfect context for a very specific phrase that keeps popping up across all these reports. A phrase that, honestly, it sounds incredibly intimidating when you attach it to a public health initiative.
I know exactly the phrase you mean.
Right. Whether you are reading Reuters, The Washington Post, or The Wall Street Journal, they all refer to this proposed Laikipia site as being military grade.
It is a deliberately striking term to utilize in the context of treating sick patients.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When the average person hears the phrase military grade, our brains immediately default to images of Abrams tanks, reinforced concrete bunkers, concertina wire, and heavy weaponry.
Of course, that's the pop culture definition.
But the sources are meticulous in defining exactly what this means when applied to an Ebola containment strategy.
They explicitly clarify that military grade in this context does not mean a kinetic combat facility or a weapons depot. It is entirely about the raw scale of logistics and the absolute uncompromising level of biosecurity.
So it's about movement and safety.
Right. When these reports use the term military grade, they're describing the utilization of the United States Transportation Command. We're talking heavy C-17 Globemaster cargo planes used to move staggering amounts of highly sensitive, fragile medical infrastructure across the globe at breakneck speed.
That is massive.
It means flying in high-level biocontainment units, generators, water purification systems, and specialized personnel directly from bases in the U.S. to a dusty airstrip in East Africa. It means implementing biosecurity protocols that are engineered to leave absolutely zero margin for human error.
And the most staggering part of the proposal, to me at least, is the timeline. They intend to execute all of that in 7 days.
Yes, 1 week.
Under emergency deployment orders, the plan outlines taking a completely empty patch of ground, potentially located near or directly on a secure Kenyan Air Force facility in Laikipia, and transforming it into a fully operational, high-security infectious disease response center in exactly 1 week.
The logistical choreography required to achieve a 7-day setup for a pathogen like Ebola is almost beyond civilian comprehension.
It sounds impossible.
We need to be clear. You aren't just pitching a few heavy-duty canvas tents and rolling in some hospital beds. You are constructing negative pressure isolation wards.
Okay, let's pause right there, because negative pressure is one of those terms that gets thrown around in the news a lot, but conceptually, it's really hard to visualize. How does a temporary structure, like a tent, maintain negative pressure?
Think of it like a giant, continuous vacuum cleaner.
Okay.
The tent itself is constructed from heavy, impermeable synthetic materials and completely sealed from the outside environment. Connected to this tent are massive, specialized HVAC systems, these heavy-duty air handlers that constantly pull air out of the tent and push it through industrial-grade HEPA filters before releasing it.
So it's actively sucking air out.
Right. Because air is constantly being sucked out faster than it is pumped in, the air pressure inside the tent is lower than the air pressure outside.
So if a doctor accidentally snags their hazmat suit on a metal bed frame, or if there is like a tiny micro tear in the seam of the tent wall.
The contaminated air inside the room does not puff out into the Kenyan environment.
Oh, because the outside air pushes in.
Exactly. Instead, the higher pressure outside air aggressively rushes in through the tear, keeping the virus trapped inside the invisible bubble. That is negative pressure.
Wow, that is incredible engineering.
And that is just the airflow. You also have to establish complex chemical decontamination shower systems for the medical staff entering and exiting the hot zone.
Right, because everything inside is contaminated.
Everything. You have to set up hyper-secure waste management and incineration protocols. Because in an Ebola ward, every single latex glove, every face shield, every gown, every bed sheet, and every drop of wastewater becomes a lethal biohazard the second it is used.
So you have to burn it all right there.
You have to bring in the fuel to burn that waste at extreme temperatures on site. That entire self-sustaining, fail-safe biosphere has to be flown in, assembled, tested, and operational in 168 hours. That is the true definition of the militarization of biological containment.
And the underlying reason for this incredibly intense militarized approach becomes glaringly obvious when you contrast it with how the global community handled the last massive Ebola crisis.
The 2014 outbreak.
Yeah. If we rewind the clocks just a bit to the devastating 2014 West African Ebola outbreak, the entire philosophy of the U.S. response was fundamentally different. Back in 2014, if an American medical worker, a doctor, or an aid volunteer was exposed to or infected by the virus in Liberia or Sierra Leone, the standard operating procedure was to put them on a highly specialized, isolated medical flight and fly them directly back to the United States.
Yes. Hospitals like Emory University in Atlanta became world famous for successfully treating these returning patients on domestic soil.
I remember that. The image of ambulances with police escorts driving down American highways carrying Ebola patients was like the defining visual of the 2014 domestic response.
It absolutely was.
But at the exact same time, the U.S. military was deploying thousands of troops and vast resources to build massive treatment centers in West Africa, specifically to treat the local populations. The overarching strategy was international containment at the source, coupled with a promise to extract American citizens.
The bring them home policy?
Exactly. But now, according to these new reports, the entire strategic paradigm has been flipped on its head. The proposed Laikipia strategy relies heavily on travel restrictions, locking down transit routes, and deliberately isolating exposed American personnel overseas to ensure the virus never even approaches the borders of the United States.
It represents a profound philosophical, tactical, and ethical pivot in national health policy.
It makes me think of how cybersecurity protocols have evolved.
Oh, how so?
Well, in 2014, we treated an infected citizen like a computer with a glitch. You bring the infected hard drive back to the main IT department, plug it into the secure network, and have your best technicians fix it.
That's a great analogy.
But now we are treating the virus like highly contagious weaponized malware. You don't bring the infected device anywhere near your mainframe. You quarantine the device on a completely separate off-site network on the other side of the world so it physically cannot compromise your home servers.
That is a highly accurate representation of the strategic shift.
But I have to wonder, is this pivot a practical scientific necessity because this Bundibugyo strain is simply too dangerous to risk flying across the Atlantic? Or are we witnessing a much more controversial political shift toward medical isolationism?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
Right. The contrast is incredibly stark. The policy has gone from bring our people home to the best care in the world to keep them over there at all costs.
And it is a debate that is currently tearing through the global public health and diplomatic communities. And if we look at the international criticism heavily highlighted by CBS, Reuters, and The Guardian, you can see the intense friction this policy shift is creating.
What are the main criticisms?
Leading public health experts, epidemiologists, and humanitarian organizations are raising massive red flags about both the operational practicality and the broader implications of this 7-day overseas deployment plan.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm a doctor looking at the blueprints for a 7-day tent city, my first thought isn't about the efficiency of the air filters. My concern is whether a pop-up facility on an African airstrip can actually replicate the safety of a permanent hospital. Are the critics arguing that the Laikipia plan is fundamentally unsafe?
The concerns are deeply operational and focused on the limits of temporary engineering. Public health experts are aggressively questioning whether a temporary facility rapidly assembled in 7 days can genuinely achieve and maintain the equivalent of a level 4 biocontainment system.
What does a true level 4 facility normally look like, just for comparison?
A permanent level 4 facility, the kind designed to handle pathogens like Ebola or Marburg, is typically a massive fortified concrete structure.
So not a tent.
Not a tent. It features incredibly complex, redundant engineering systems. We are talking about dedicated backup power grids, specialized airlocks, airtight steel doors, reinforced structural integrity to withstand extreme weather, and highly sophisticated waste sterilization systems built directly into the plumbing.
That sounds like a fortress.
It is. So critics are asking a very blunt question. Can you genuinely replicate that level of redundant fail-safe security in a rapid deployment tent city?
And what's the consensus?
Many experts are highly skeptical. They warn that a rushed 7-day deployment is inherently dangerous when you are dealing with a virus that ruthlessly exploits the tiniest microtear in a hazmat suit or a momentary drop in generator power.
So there is a massive debate over the physical integrity of the site itself. But a hospital isn't just a building, right? It's the people inside it. Are there concerns about how this policy affects the medical personnel on the ground?
The second major critique revolves entirely around human behavior, and this is where the policy implications become incredibly complicated. We have to look at the incentive structure.
The incentive for the doctors volunteering.
Exactly. If the official U.S. policy explicitly dictates that if you volunteer to go to Central Africa to fight an Ebola outbreak and you happen to get exposed through a torn glove or a splashed visor, you will absolutely not be brought home.
Wow.
Yeah, you will instead be diverted to a temporary holding facility in central Kenya. What does that do to the psychology of medical recruitment?
It completely alters the risk calculation. You are asking incredibly highly trained doctors and nurses to risk their lives in a grueling, terrifying environment, but you are intentionally removing the ultimate safety net.
The safety net of domestic care.
Yeah, the assurance that if things go wrong, they will be evacuated back to their home country's top-tier permanent hospitals.
Precisely. Critics forcefully argue that this policy of mandatory overseas isolation will actively and immediately discourage the crucial, highly trained medical volunteers from organizations like Doctors Without Borders or various international aid groups from traveling to the DRC and Uganda in the first place.
Because they don't want to get stuck.
Right. You need those specialists on the ground to contain the outbreak at its source. If you choke off the supply of brave medical professionals willing to go into the hot zone because they legitimately fear being stranded in a foreign pop-up holding facility if they spike a fever, you actually degrade the frontline response.
So it backfires.
Completely. You allow the outbreak to burn hotter, longer, and spread faster. But trying to protect the homeland so aggressively with an ironclad border policy, you might inadvertently guarantee that the virus spreads further out of control globally.
That is a terrifying, self-defeating catch-22. You build a wall so high to keep the threat out, you prevent the firemen from leaving to put out the blaze.
That's exactly it.
But it is not just international public health experts in Geneva or Washington who are analyzing this proposal with a microscope. The people who actually live, work, and raise their families in Kenya are watching this diplomatic maneuvering unfold in real time.
And their reaction, as documented in these reports, is understandably intense and deeply complicated.
And rightfully so. We have to pivot and view this entire situation from the perspective of Nairobi. The reporting is extremely clear on a vital point. As of the publication of these sources, the Kenyan government has not rubber-stamped this plan.
No, it's not a done deal at all.
They have not fully approved the Laikipia facility. Instead, they are engaged in some very high-level, high-stakes diplomatic maneuvering with Washington.
It is a delicate dance.
Honestly, it sounds less like a partnership and more like a high-stakes hostage negotiation over biohazard real estate. Think about it like this. Imagine your very wealthy, very powerful neighbor comes over to your house and says, "Hey, I have this incredibly dangerous, highly venomous, exotic pet that I need to quarantine. My house isn't secure enough right now and I don't want it near my family. Can I build a cage in your living room and keep it there for a few weeks?"
From the neighbor's perspective, it's a completely rational request to protect his own property.
Sure, but your immediate visceral answer as the homeowner would probably be absolutely not. Get that thing away from my family. But what if that neighbor is an incredibly vital economic and security partner? You might not be able to just slam the door in their face. You might say, "Okay, I will consider letting you house this dangerous thing in my home, but my demands are going to be steep. You have to install $1 million state-of-the-art security system in my house that I get to keep forever.
Right, hazard pay.
Yeah, you have to pay me a massive monthly hazard stipend. And crucially, if my own kids happen to get sick, you have to guarantee they get full access to your world-class medical team and security system.
Which is brilliant leverage.
Based on the reporting, that is exactly the diplomatic leverage Kenya is utilizing. The reports state that Kenya is firmly demanding that this proposed Laikipia facility must serve all nationalities in the region, not just American personnel.
That's a huge stipulation.
And furthermore, they are requesting significant, tangible additional U.S. aid, medical supplies, and financial support to offset the massive biological risk they are being asked to take on.
This raises an important question about geopolitical leverage and the true nature of national sovereignty. The Kenyan government is fully aware of their immense value in this equation.
They know they hold the cards.
They do. They know exactly why the U.S. needs their geography, their political stability, and their pristine airstrips. But they also intimately understand the immense domestic political risk they are running by even entertaining this proposal in public.
Because the public is going to react.
Strongly. The leadership in Nairobi has to meticulously balance the very real, visceral fear of their electorate with the undeniable generational opportunity to acquire cutting-edge medical equipment, highly specialized biohazard training for their own doctors, massive upgrades to their national disease surveillance networks, and an influx of international funding.
But the public fear is the ultimate wild card here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
According to the data provided by the CDC in these reports, right now, today, there are 0 confirmed Ebola cases inside the borders of Kenya. The official risk of the virus spontaneously appearing in Nairobi is officially deemed low.
Yes, epidemiologically low.
But a low epidemiological risk does not equal low public anxiety.
Not at all. You have to factor in the deep, lingering psychological scars left by the 2014 West African crisis. Even though that outbreak occurred on the absolute opposite side of the continent, thousands of miles away, the sheer terror of the Ebola virus is universal.
The imagery of that suffering is seared into the global consciousness.
Exactly. Kenyan citizens are deeply concerned about the concept of imported infections. They're fiercely worried about accidental exposure. What happens if a U.S. transport protocol fails? What happens if a biomedical waste bag isn't incinerated properly?
It only takes one mistake.
Right. And they are profoundly worried about the massive strain a localized outbreak would place on their own domestic healthcare systems. Kenya has excellent medical infrastructure, but even the best hospitals in the world would be instantly overwhelmed and paralyzed by a sudden cluster of Ebola cases.
And the sources specifically mention the role of digital communication. Social media in Kenya is already lighting up with a very specific, potent narrative.
The rumors spread fast.
Yeah, users are framing the situation by claiming the country is being forcibly turned into a holding ground or a dumping site for foreign infectious patients. That is an incredibly dangerous narrative for any government to manage, especially one facing regular democratic elections.
It touches on the deepest, most sensitive nerves of post-colonial sovereignty. When you break down the logistics of the proposal, ordinary citizens are asking fundamental questions about control.
Like, who is actually in charge?
Yes, who actually controls this fenced-off facility in Laikipia? Is the ultimate authority the Kenyan Ministry of Health, or is it the U.S. military command structure?
That's a great question. What happens if something goes wrong legally?
That's the nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
If there is a catastrophic containment breach, let's say a local Kenyan logistics worker contracted to deliver food to the outer perimeter of the facility is exposed to the virus, who holds legal responsibility? Does U.S. military jurisdiction apply on that airstrip, or does Kenyan law reign supreme?
The legal gray area is huge.
It is. The sheer optics of the situation are highly inflammatory. You have the presence of foreign medical teams, heavily backed by foreign military logistics aircraft, operating a completely isolated biosecure facility on sovereign Kenyan soil. To many local observers, it looks exactly like wealthy, powerful nations intentionally exporting their most lethal health risks to developing nations in order to keep their own homeland clean.
And beyond the theoretical risk of a breach at the facility itself, you mentioned earlier that Nairobi is a massive international transit hub. That geographic reality makes Kenya incredibly vulnerable to the virus naturally, regardless of whether this U.S. facility is ever built, right?
Exactly. The vulnerability is baked into Kenya's economic success. There are extensive, highly porous cross-border trade and transport links between Uganda, where the Ebola outbreak is currently active, and Kenya.
But people are moving constantly.
You have thousands of people, commercial goods, and long-haul transport trucks moving back and forth across that border constantly. So the Kenyan government isn't solely worried about the U.S. military intentionally flying the virus into Laikipia. They're equally worried about the virus quietly walking across the border organically via a sick trader.
And if Kenya agrees to host this U.S. facility and they actually win their demand to open it up to the whole region.
The logistical demands on Kenya skyrocket
Right.
because Kenyan regional hospitals are going to need massively enhanced triage training. Border surveillance and temperature checks at land crossings will have to dramatically intensify. Medical personnel across the entire country, from small clinics to major urban centers, will suddenly require stockpiles of high-level personal protective equipment just in case a patient presents with a fever.
And running parallel to the direct health and sovereignty implications, there is a massive multi-billion-dollar economic sword hanging over this entire diplomatic negotiation. We have to talk about tourism.
Oh, the tourism factor is massive.
Tourism is an absolute pillar of the Kenyan economy. We are talking about world-renowned safaris in the Masai Mara, luxury coastal resorts in Mombasa, and a massive hospitality industry that employs hundreds of thousands of Kenyans.
It is an enormous economic engine that relies entirely on international perception and confidence.
Just think about the power of a single headline. If a major news network runs a chyron that says U.S. military builds emergency Ebola facility in Kenya, even if the article clearly states there isn't a single local infection and the facility is just for precautionary staging.
It won't matter.
No. That headline alone will absolutely devastate international airline travel confidence. It will immediately scare away tourists from Europe, Asia, and the Americas who, frankly, don't understand the vast geography of the African continent and simply assume the entire country of Kenya is now a biological hot zone.
It's the headline effect.
It will result in canceled safari bookings, empty hotel rooms, and massive economic losses. So the Kenyan government is agonizingly weighing the promise of vital U.S. medical funding and infrastructure upgrades against the very real potential loss of billions of dollars in tourism revenue, driven entirely by the optics of hosting the facility.
It is an agonizing, incredibly complex geopolitical calculation, which is exactly why analysts view this proposal through two very different prisms.
How so?
While some view the U.S. request as a remarkable sign of trust and respect for Kenya's capabilities, they see it as proof of a true, mature strategic partnership between equals.
And the other side.
Others view it as a highly unequal, fundamentally exploitative arrangement where the superpower dictates terms based on financial leverage. The domestic political sensitivity for the Kenyan leadership cannot be overstated. If the government communicates this agreement poorly to their citizens, or if, heaven forbid, there is a logistical incident at the site, it could be politically explosive.
Which brings us to a sweeping realization. As you read through the meticulous details in these reports from the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Reuters, it becomes crystal clear that this single hypothetical facility in Laikipia acts as a perfect microcosm for how the entire machinery of global diplomacy is fundamentally mutating.
It is the sharp tip of a very large, rapidly changing spear.
So what does this all mean for you? When you hear the phrase national security, what is the default mental image that pops into your head?
Usually borders and weapons.
Right. For most of us, national security has always been defined by physical borders, fighter jets intercepting bombers, cyber warfare shutting down power grids, or maybe economic trade embargoes. But the evidence in this source material proves that the definition has permanently, irreversibly expanded.
It really has.
A microscopic, invisible virus mutating in the jungles of the Congo is now being treated with the exact same logistical gravity, the exact same rapid deployment military orders, and the exact same high-level diplomatic maneuvering as a hostile, nuclear-armed adversary.
If we connect this specific facility to the bigger picture, this is the origin story of the future of global health. We are looking at a world where pandemics are no longer siloed as just a public health issue for the World Health Organization, the CDC, and Doctors Without Borders to quietly sort out with humanitarian aid.
The military is stepping in.
There is now a massive, rapidly expanding overlap between hard military operations, intelligence gathering, and pandemic response. And crucially, the continent of Africa is becoming increasingly undeniably central to global health security.
Because the harsh reality of globalized travel means that the diseases that emerge in isolated regions do not stay there. A virus is only a 12-hour commercial flight away from any major city on Earth.
Exactly. And the decisions being made right now in the diplomatic back channels regarding Laikipia are going to set a monumental historical precedent.
For future outbreaks.
Yes. This negotiation will establish the working blueprint for how global superpowers and rapidly emerging regional powers negotiate the containment of future diseases.
Mm.
Kenya is brilliantly, but dangerously, positioning itself as an indispensable geopolitical player.
They aren't just saying yes.
Right, they are demanding a seat at the table, forcing the U.S. to make concessions, and refusing to just be a passive, silent staging ground. But they are executing this maneuver at the immense, terrifying risk of domestic political backlash and catastrophic economic disruption.
It is a phenomenal high-wire balancing act. We started this deep dive talking about the sheer shock of waking up to a 7-day military blueprint to build an Ebola containment zone in a country that doesn't even have a single case of the outbreak.
It's a lot to process.
And by tracing the threads through these incredible investigative reports, we've seen how that single proposal connects everything. It connects shifting U.S. isolationist health strategies, the literal logistical miracles of building negative pressure tent cities with military cargo planes, the diplomatic hardball of the Kenyan government leveraging their geography, and the very real justified anxieties of ordinary citizens who are terrified of their home becoming a biological holding pen just to protect someone else's homeland.
It is a narrative where every single layer you peel back reveals a deeper, more complicated, and often more uncomfortable reality about how deeply interconnected, reliant, and vulnerable our modern world truly is.
We've covered the logistics, the politics, and the economics. But before we wrap up, we have to revisit that one specific detail buried deep in the international criticism regarding the psychological impact on the medical workers. Because that feels like the loose thread that could unravel the entire strategy.
Yes, the frontline medical volunteers.
Right. The reports note a very specific fear among public health experts, that if these exposed volunteers know with certainty that they will be intercepted and held in a foreign, heavily guarded military-grade facility in Kenya, rather than being flown home to their families in domestic hospitals, human nature might take over. The fear is that these workers might start intentionally hiding their symptoms.
That is the fear, yes.
I want to hand this over to you because this feels like the ultimate contradiction of the entire plan.
I want you, the listener, to deeply mull over this paradox. Think about the profound irony here. A global superpower spends billions of dollars to design the most intense, technologically advanced, military-grade biological security measures in human history.
The ultimate fortress.
Right. They utilize heavy cargo planes, negative pressure vacuums, and rapid deployment logistics. The entire system is engineered specifically to keep this deadly virus visible, isolated, and perfectly contained under bright lights.
But the human element.
Exactly. What happens if the sheer intimidation, isolation, and militarization of that very system becomes the exact reason a terrified doctor or nurse miles away in the Congo decides to pop an aspirin and hide a fever so they can board a commercial flight home?
Oh, wow.
What if the ultimate impenetrable containment system ironically drives the virus underground, making the invisible enemy completely undetectable until it is far too late to stop it? It proves that you can engineer the perfect military response, but you can never fully engineer human fear.
A sobering, brilliant thought to leave you with. The next time you see a headline about a sudden facility going up in your backyard, you will know exactly how many invisible geopolitical, logistical, and psychological layers are stacked underneath the concrete. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the bigger picture behind the logistics, and we will catch you on the next one.